So welcome everybody. First of all, I want to check the sound here. Can you hear me clearly? Okay, good. What I just want to open with, first of all, it's wonderful to see everyone. At the high holidays, there is a spiritual idea that we get from the Kotzker Rebbe, I believe, which is that there is nothing as whole as a broken heart. And it's when we gather at the high holidays with a broken heart, it means that we have achieved clarity and honesty with ourselves about how maybe imperfect we are in our circumstances. And that tunes us, trains us precisely to where it is we need to go in our personal lives to make a difference. But then there is the word shlemut, shalom. What does it mean to be whole? Is to be shalem. Wholeness. Wholeness is when broken pieces come together. Yesterday I spoke about the ark, the teva, that carried Noach and his family and the biodiversity, perhaps, that we all enjoy today, is the same as what carried the broken pieces of the tablets that God had given to Moses at Mount Sinai. It was an imperfect world, and he had to break what was perfect in order to live in reality. But he didn't distribute those pieces, he collected them. There was a need for those pieces to remain together and to be held together. And that's what I think of. We, with our broken hearts of what has happened in Israel and the ensuing war, has broken us all. And out of that comes an impulse to want to be together. It's an incredible privilege and honor to witness just how connected this community is, our whole Jewish community, and to recognize those elements of the world that would share in the shlemut of Yisrael, state of Israel, the people Israel, and all who would associate with it. So I want to invite up Russell to introduce our speaker that we had different plans for when this was first arranged months ago, but are so grateful to have you and looking forward to our conversation that follows. And I just want to say Shehechianu, that we could all be here sharing this together. Amen. Russell, please take it away.
So if you turn to page 353 in the big red, sorry, I got confused.
Lean into the mic.
Okay. So for those of you who know the movie Annie Hall, Rick Hirschhaut is what Grammy Hall would call a real Jew. Or maybe to put it in a different way with a different movie reference, the movie A Few Good Men. For those who may not have seen it, you have these Marine lawyers, Navy lawyers, who are defending two Marines who are accused of having hazed another Marine until he died. And they were all stationed in Guantanamo Bay. And at one point, one of the Navy lawyers turns to one of the other ones and says, "Why do you like them so much?" And the answer that Navy lawyer gives is, "Because they stand on a wall and say, 'Nothing's going to hurt you tonight, not on my watch.'" And that's basically what Rick Hirschhaut has spent his entire life doing, not with a gun, but with his mind, with his voice, and with his presence. He's basically spent his adult life in the furtherance of and defense of the worldwide Jewish community. He spent 21 years with the Anti-Defamation League, I think more than 10 of them as the Midwest Regional Director. He was one of the founders and the founding executive director of the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center. He won an Emmy Award. I hadn't realized this until I was looking up your background. As a co-executive producer of the nationally broadcast documentary Skokie, invaded but not conquered. I've known Rick for 4 years, a little over 4 years, since he first came to be the executive director of AJC Los Angeles, and it has been a privilege to know him and to work with him, which I continue to do with the work that I do for AJC. He is articulate, he is a passionate defender of Am Yisrael, not just Israel, but Am Yisrael as well. I think he'll have some interesting thoughts to share with everyone, and then we'll do Q&A, which I think will be most of the time. Let's go from there. Rick, take it away. Whoa.
Russell, thank you for that incredibly kind and gracious introduction. It's a joy to work with you and to be your partner. Russell is the president of the Los Angeles AJC board. Stepped into this role a few months ago, and considering all that's going on in the world today, we couldn't have a finer and more decent and more brilliant and compassionate leader of our board and of our leadership, and again, a partner to me. So thank you so very, very much for that. I've come up to the bima without a single note, but with a lot rattling around in my head, because this has been just a montage in high speed over the last 2 weeks for all of us, since word first began to sort of dribble out, not on Saturday morning, that awful Saturday of October 7th, but actually in the later hours of Friday evening, October 6th. I fully confess to being a little bit tied to my phone, and whether it's email, whether it's social media because of its tremendous power to reach literally millions of people, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. But it was late that Friday evening when the initial reports started to appear on the phone, and I had to do a double take, because the language and the framing of militants crossing, piercing, and breaching, I think the word was breaching, the border between Gaza and southern Israel by the dozens was reported at the time, was simply an incomprehensible thought. It made no sense. And as the hours wore on, and as we all awoke to the horrible reality of October 7th, we knew it was not a nightmare. It has been a nightmare for these couple of weeks, but that it was a sobering and jarring jolt of reality for all of us who love Israel, who are proud Zionists, who are on the side of humanity and civilization and decency and respect for the sanctity of human life. For all of those categories, for all of us, this has just been a horrific couple of weeks. And I know that as a congregation, you've had an opportunity to have a little bit of safe space discussion and conversation. That's important. That's incredibly important, because not only are we together absorbing, attempting to understand and interpret this horrible body blow, not just to our brothers and sisters and our family members and our friends in Israel, but really to the Jewish people. This was going to be a conversation when it was first contemplated, when Russell and Michelle reached out many months ago, and Rabbi Josh, that this was going to be a conversation about AJC's work, our outreach on anti-Semitism, our involvement in the White House national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, all of which is very, very important and exceedingly relevant even today because of the Israel dimension. But obviously today's conversation has taken on an altogether different different patina and different tone. And we are a community that is reeling. We talk about PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. You can drop the P. We are in the midst of traumatic stress and feeling it and enduring it. There's no post here yet. There will be, there will need to be, but we're not there. Here's where we are. As the days began to wear on from October 7, because October 7 was the jolt, but it wasn't the enormity of the loss that we increasingly began to understand. Because what was a cause for a tremendous gasp and horror when we first heard that some 70, 80, 90, 100 innocent civilians, men, women, children, babies, the infirm, Holocaust survivors were among those lost and ultimately taken hostage, the numbers just exponentially kept growing. And what we now understand, just to be, that everyone understands, that is that during those hours of October 7, some 1,400 Israelis, civilians, not combatants, not IDF soldiers, not border police, were savagely, brutally murdered in ways that defy description and that really speak to horrific evil and cruelty. And that's what Hamas perpetrated. Hamas, which is dedicated to Israel's destruction by its very charter. Hamas that has ruled the Gaza Strip with an iron fist since 2007. And notwithstanding all of the billions of dollars of aid that have flowed in from Qatar and other countries, has not seen that aid go to the Palestinian people in Gaza, but to go toward this creating and sustaining this apparatus of mass murder and death and destruction. And that's the simple truth. And I say it's the simple truth because it's the overarching truth as well. And everything that we talk about going forward, whether it's, and we'll get there, whether we talk about a ground incursion by Israel, how long might that go? What might the day after or days after look like when Israel has, God willing, eliminated this threat right at its border? That's all for another day. And let me digress for a moment as well, because the sort of topic du jour right now on many of the morning shows, today included, has to do with this cautionary note that President Biden struck. And President Biden has been remarkable, and the entire administration has been remarkable. Secretary Blinken, General Austin, across the board in their unequivocal support for Israel. And after the president's visit just 3 days ago, lost track of days, it may have been 2 days ago, there was this sense of this little bit of caution, this little bit of, and you're hearing it, understanding the justifiable outrage that Americans felt after 9/11. This is the equivalent of 15 or more 9/11s, just from the standpoint of the numbers lost relative to Israel's population. And the sense of be careful, be judicious, learn from the mistakes we made in America. The one element that's missing from this discussion, and I do a lot of yelling at the TV these days. Some of it's due to just not getting enough sleep, but some of it is just wanting to wake people up. Yes, we had justifiable outrage in America after 9/11. And what we ultimately chose to do, we did, right or wrong, mistakes, whatever it might be. It's always easy to be the Monday morning quarterback. But where we ultimately engaged after 9/11 was over there, was a long plane ride over. It wasn't right here. It wasn't in the next town over. And that's what Israel is facing. And so I would just caution all of us when we hear the punditry, and it's all well-intentioned. These are not people who are critical of Israel who are putting this forward, but just understand, this is an existential threat next door. And it's that fundamental, and it's that ugly. Yesterday, my wife Susan and I, Susan's who's here with me today, thankfully, and with me always, and especially in these last 2 weeks as we've navigated through the messaging and really trying to bring AJC's role forward for a community that is very, very much fearful and anxious. And we'll talk about that as well. But I think I just lost my train of thought, and not the first time. Yesterday, we had brunch, got it back. We had brunch with a woman who is named Tal Levy. I know a lot of Tal Levies. This particular Tal Levy, we didn't know until 2 days ago and met her for the first time yesterday. She works for a major music company based here in Los Angeles. She runs their Tel Aviv office. And on October 7th, she lives in an older part of Tel Aviv, as many young people do. Not every building has the safe room or the shelter in the basement. So when the sirens ring, you've got to, realize what's happening, get out of your apartment, run down the street, get into the safe area, all within 60 seconds. She managed to do this, and most of the rockets, as she explained to us, as we know, thank God, Iron Dome intercepts. She said to us yesterday, but for Iron Dome, Israel would not exist today. And we've seen this. We saw this in 2014 with thousands of rockets raining down from Gaza. We saw it in 2021 with thousands of rockets, and now we've seen it, rockets and this horror on the ground. She was frightened because she's in a vulnerable spot, called her parents. Her parents live a little bit north of Tel Aviv. They rushed down, they picked her up, they took her to their home, and then a rocket ended up hitting her building, and her neighbor was killed. So there, but for the grace of God, she was very, very lucky. Within that hour, had her parents not gotten in the car, driven as fast as they could, retrieved her, it may have been a different outcome. She's here in LA now for a period of time. The company has brought her here, but she's traumatized, like so many are. And she said part of the trauma today in Israel is that you don't know if your neighbor may turn on you. If you have an Arab-Israeli neighbor, Arab citizens of Israel, you just don't know what might happen. There is that sense of fear and insecurity. And when you think about Tel Aviv, those who have been to Israel, and you think about Jerusalem, you think about all the vibrancy and the love of life, and just walking down along the promenade by the sea, activity at all hours of the day and night, volleyball and cafes and music and people working out and all of that. Nothing now. Everyone is in their homes. Everyone is staying in safe spaces and safe shelter. And that's the day-to-day reality, just within Israel at this point. It matters for each of us when we talk about what can we do. It goes from the simple to the larger gestures. Just sending a text or doing a WhatsApp call or sending an email, just reaching out and saying, thinking of you, hope you're okay, stay strong, we're with you. In your own words, however you say it, it really, really matters. So these last couple of weeks, again, the enormity of the horror has been revealed. Most of the world, again, the civilized Western world, has stood with Israel. There have been some remarkable expressions of support and solidarity. When you see the Brandenburg Gate draped in the Israeli flag in Berlin, when you see the Eiffel Tower lit up in blue and white, when you see, of course, the World Trade Center, Freedom Tower, and the Empire State Building in blue and white, that we've come to expect, thankfully. Tremendous expressions of support from artists, people like Bono from the rock group U2, who's opening the new Sphere in Las Vegas, and literally on October 7th, changed the lyrics to his song In the Name of Love. This is the song that begins with April 4, Memphis. It's an ode and an homage to the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Instead, he talks about October 7th in the beautiful Negev sky and thinking about these beautiful, beautiful souls who were lost at the music festival. And by the way, again, more details keep coming out. It wasn't just a horrific coincidence that Hamas, in breaching the wall, happened upon the music festival. They knew. It was all coordinated. The CNN which has been great, by the way. CNN has been great. Did a 1 hour piece last night on the Hamas attack, and they showed how they blocked the exits. They knew exactly what they were doing and what was going on. So these last couple of weeks, just to give you a sense of what AJC has done and what we've done in coordination really with our partners in the LA Jewish community, the Jewish Federation, the ADL, the Board of Rabbis, Stand With Us. There have been many expressions of support and solidarity. We've needed it as a community. We've needed to come together. I know many of you were at the vigil at Stephen Wise Temple just 2 weeks ago. Feels like 2 months ago. Many of you were at a rally standing with Israel at the Federal Building a few days later. Many of you were at the March for Israel down Pico Boulevard just a week ago. And there are more and more events and activities that have taken place. AJC's role has been to message to the broader community as well, to reach out to media, to assure and affirm Israel's moral high ground in the aftermath of this horrible terrorist attack. And it's important that we did it at the beginning, and it's important that we continue to do it, because the narrative is now beginning to change a little bit. Israel has not even gone in to Gaza. The ground incursion has not yet happened. The IDF is ready. The soldiers are sleeping by the tanks, and they're ready to go when the order is given. It has not yet been given. But even without Israel entering in and beginning what is going to be a long, protracted, and difficult campaign, urban warfare essentially in a highly densely populated area, it's going to be painful. It's going to be costly to Israel. And there will be the collateral damage, the tragedy of innocent Palestinians who will be caught up and lost during all of this. Why? Because Hamas embeds itself among the Palestinian population. When we heard just a few days ago the horrendous rocket attack landing at the hospital, immediately Hamas put out word to international media that it was the Israelis. It was a retaliatory strike by Israel, and Israel was to blame. That wasn't the case. Doesn't mitigate the tragedy of the loss of life and the suffering that is taking place, but it was Hamas that was responsible, or Palestinian Islamic Jihad working really their acolyte in terror. And that rocket, as I understand it, landed in a munitions depot adjacent to the hospital. Think about that for a moment. All the weaponry and artillery next to a hospital. That is symbolic of what Hamas has done, putting their rocket launchers by schools, by daycare centers, amidst the civilian population. So the suffering that is there is tragic, but it is the root cause of Hamas that has created these conditions. And we should never, ever move off of that narrative, because that is the original source and the original sin, if you will, of what has happened here. So messaging to media has been a big part of it. Making sure the community has a chance to come together over these last 2 weeks, a big part of it. One of the unique roles of AJC, and I think distinctive in many ways, is that we work very closely with the diplomatic corps, the foreign consulates that are here in Los Angeles. And you may not know that outside of Washington, where all the embassies reside, or New York by the UN, where all the permanent missions to the UN are situated, LA is about the largest cluster of foreign consulates anywhere in the world. Sort of a debate between Seoul and South Korea and LA. But it's to say to you that more than 100 consulates, more than 100 nations are represented just here in Los Angeles. Some of them are more honorific, not really full consular functions, but most of them are. And so we worked, again, there's nothing that's happened. I was sharing with the rabbi and others earlier, there's nothing that's happened, any event that has probably had more than 2 or 3 days of planning in order to happen over these last 2 weeks. And I think it speaks to the urgency and the will that we all share. But on Thursday, it was Thursday, AJC convened 25 of these consulates in one place. We brought them to Holocaust Museum LA, and we stood in a beautiful space that is sort of outdoor but covered from the sun, the Children's Memorial Space. And every single diplomat who was with us stood up in support and solidarity with Israel. And many of them who took to the podium were there not just to support, to express their solidarity for Israel and their condemnation of Hamas, but they were also there to plead for the release of their own nationals being held in Gaza. So we shouldn't lose sight of that as well. Obviously, we know Americans are being held, but there are people from many, many countries who have, some of them, dual citizenship, Israel and France, Israel and the UK, Israel and the US, and others, but some who were just there and caught up in this madness. And that was an important expression of support and solidarity. It's the kind of thing that we have to continue to do as all of this goes forward. I'm going to stop in a minute because I should have said at the outset, I very much want this to be a conversation and discussion and a chance for each of you to share and ask questions, because we learn and we increase our own sense of understanding and comfort, I think, by learning from one another. So where are we today? Israel will soon go into Gaza. We know this. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there will be a steep price that is paid. Israel has no choice but to eliminate the threat of Hamas. This can't be business as usual, where it gets quiet for a year and a half while Hamas is able to rearm and re-equip. That threat in the next town over, as it were, needs to be eliminated once and for all. And it will take time, and it will take tremendous skill and precision and strategy. And at the same time, we will have a role, a continuing role in this country, and that is to always affirm in every way Israel's moral high ground. Israel, again, has the right to protect its citizens of all backgrounds, not just Jews, of all backgrounds. And it wasn't just Jewish Israelis who were victimized, which is one of the cruel ironies of all of this, in all of this. Israel has the right to protect itself and to have peace along its borders. And that's what hopefully will happen going into Gaza. At the same time, there's a threat. We've seen some manifestation of this over the last week coming from the northern border, coming from Hezbollah, which controls southern Lebanon. There have been rockets fired in. Many of the towns that dot the northern border of Israel have been evacuated. More than 20,000 Israelis have been moved to other parts of the country. And by the way, several 100,000 Israelis in the Negev area, where all of that network of kibbutzim and the small towns have also been moved further north. And the country is coming together in ways that, if you were paying attention for the nearly 40 weeks of steady, Motzei Shabbat demonstrations on Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv, that was a very well-oiled, sophisticated, well-organized apparatus of the ultimate expression of democracy. People wrapping themselves in the flag. I had the privilege of going to one of those demonstrations in early August. On a dime or on a shekel, that entire apparatus shifted and has gone into full operational mode to support the country, to provide critical supplies, to provide hygienic needs. All of the volunteering that is taking place is the expression of that network. And the country has come together in ways that hopefully, when all of this is done, will restore a certain balance and a certain civility among all people in Israel. But again, that's a conversation for another day. I will share, by the way, because these again are I think kind of the anecdotes and the vignettes that need to be shared. You may have seen when Secretary Blinken was in Israel, and he was at one of these large warehouse where people were moving supplies and all sorts of relief and care packages were being created. He was talking to people who had survived the attack at the music festival and who had survived the attack generally. And then off in the corner, spontaneously begins to erupt the cheer, USA, USA. Now, in that part of the world, when USA or America is invoked in a collective expression, it's usually not a cheer. It's usually not positive. And these are the things we have to remind people of as we go forward. I did want to touch for a moment on the power of social media, and I don't know if this is a group that is addicted or familiar or regularly using social media, but it does have a very important role to play in all of this. And I'll share a couple of vignettes because it's important to understand what's out there. Part of the battle for the hearts and minds of Americans when it comes to understanding Israel and supporting Israel is with the generation, I'm going to sound very antiquated here, but it's with the generation that is getting much of its news and information from social media, from some of these different streaming channels, and frankly, from some of the people that they follow, the so-called influencers. And I'll share with you, within an hour within hours of the attacks becoming known on October 7th, one of those influencers, one of the largest in the world, who is here in LA, Kylie Jenner, this is of the Kardashian clan, posted a very simple message on her social media. And it said, "I stand with Israel." Within an hour, she was the subject of such vitriolic scorn and hate, she took the post down. And I mention her not because people follow her or it's fashion or whatever. She has 400 million followers. And it mattered when that post went up, and sadly it mattered when the post came down. And there thankfully have been many so-called A-listers in Hollywood and others who are front and center supporting Israel. And it's important at this time that there be no equivocation when it comes to understanding the threat of Hamas terror and the brutality of what they perpetrated on October 7th. So it's very important that that dimension never be lost and that be a standalone. All of that said, we also have to make clear, and we've been doing it at AJC, and my colleagues have as well, you can condemn and should, in fact, appropriately condemn the terror of Hamas and still be supportive of the well-being of the Palestinian people. They are not incongruous. It is not a zero-sum game. There is, God willing, there will be, at some point, an accommodation and a settlement to the age-old Israel-Palestinian conflict. Because think of where we were before October 7th. On October 6th and the days before, we were celebrating the 3-year anniversary of the Abraham Accords, which created normalization and peace for Israel with previously sworn enemies of Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Kingdom of Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan, and you add to that the peace already with Jordan. I don't think Jordan's behaved very well throughout the crisis, but the peace is there with Jordan. The peace with Egypt a little bit better. But we were right on the precipice, and there was momentum building for the big catch, potential normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And Hamas and their supporters, primarily the Iranians, who are really the bankrollers of global terrorism, they saw this too. And so the attack on October 7th was an attempt to derail all of that progress and to take the notion of Saudi normalization with Israel off the table. For the short term, that objective was achieved for the short term. But hopefully we will get back to it at some point. And hopefully there will be down the road some bona fide, responsible leadership within the Palestinian Authority so that Israel actually has a partner to talk to and negotiate with. I was able to bring a group of leaders from California to Israel in August. And as part of a program that AJC organizes called Project Interchange, we bring people of all walks of life. This was a political elected official trip. 2 of the participants from LA were from West Hollywood, the mayor and one of the council members. And we spent half a day in Ramallah, the same Ramallah where you saw the violent, ugly, horrific protests over the last couple of days on the streets there. And we were there because we were there in conversation about what could be with the Palestinian Authority. One of the leaders we met with spoke about the difficulty in identifying the next generation of leadership. That Mahmoud Abbas, who is 88 years old, is now in the 18th year of his 4-year term as head of the Palestinian Authority. This is what Israel was contending with before October 7th. So it's going to be challenging, but it's for later. For now, the mission and the objective is very clear: to eliminate the threat, the existential threat that Hamas poses to Israel, and the larger threat that Hamas-inspired terror, this is really ISIS 2.0, poses to people, to Western civilization, to democracy, and to freedom and freedom-loving nations. And that's what's in front of us. So Israel is leading the way, and sadly, tragically, has had to endure the worst of what Hamas represents. So if I may, I'll stop there, and the floor is open for any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Rick, can I ask you to maybe talk about one other thing? Maybe talk a little bit about your perception of what what's happening means for anti-Semitism here in the United States, sort of now and kind of moving into the future.
Thank you, Russell. Absolutely. So the first question, I don't know if for our folks who may be streaming, what these events mean in terms of anti-Semitism here in America. I think we need to be concerned. I don't think we need to be fearful, but I think we need to be mindful and ever vigilant. What that means is there have been calls for echoing and committing similar acts upon Jewish communities around the world that we saw on October 7th. There was a call for a so-called global day of jihad for Friday, October 13th. And that sent palpable and understandable waves of concern and to some degree, fear throughout Jewish communities. Young parents wondering whether they should send their young kids to Jewish preschool on that Friday, or whether to show up at a synagogue. These are very real, justifiable concerns. Thankfully, that day came and went without incident in America. There were a couple of incidents. There was an Israeli diplomat or an employee of the Israeli embassy in Beijing who was attacked on the street, and unclear whether it was tied to that, but presumably it was. And there was a teacher who was attacked in France with the assailant stabbing the individual and shouting Allahu Akbar while doing so. We didn't see that, thankfully, in America. We did see a horrific murder of a young woman in Detroit yesterday, Samantha Wohl. Sam, as she was affectionately known by our AJC family, was very involved in our work, was a young leader in Detroit, was involved in promoting Muslim-Jewish dialogue in Detroit, was the president of her Reconstructionist temple, and someone who just, see the pictures, the smile and the warmth and the joy of being Jewish and being proudly Jewish. This is a unspeakable tragedy. It is unclear at this time, as law enforcement investigates, whether she was targeted because of her Jewish identity and her Jewish activism. Unclear. Hopefully that wasn't the case. This is still a tragedy nonetheless. I think to Russell's question, we need to be ever vigilant, but we also need to live our lives. So that means appropriate security at our houses of worship, as you saw when you walked in this morning, a heightened, elevated presence. It means appropriate security at Jewish community centers, at day schools, at other rallies and gatherings. All of that, we just need to be more careful. And we are living at a time where, again, we ought not be sounding the alarm of panic or fear, but we have to be smart. Just have to be smarter. We don't know what yet may be coming. And it is fair to say the situation for Israel, again, on the eve of ground incursion, it's going to become more challenging. We will see more casualties in Gaza. We will see calls for ceasefire, calls for condemnation of Israel. And we will see, as we often see when events flare in the Mideast, we will see incidents of anti-Semitism and hate on our streets here in America. And I say that just from the gut, and having been in this arena professionally my entire career, it will happen. We're seeing it in New York already, scrawling, epithets, not necessarily attacks, but just blatant, in-your-face expressions of anti-Semitism. And I think we can expect it here in LA. Fortunately, we have law enforcement who care. I've had many conversations with our LA County Sheriff, Robert Luna, in recent weeks. He is the consummate mensch. He understands it, he gets it, and he wants to make sure that the Jewish community and all communities are safe and protected here in LA. Same goes for LA, our LAPD police chief, Michael. And so that's FBI, that's, at all levels. All of that said, there's no magic, there's no panacea, there's no elixir that's going to make anti-Semitism go away. We should be grateful to our law enforcement friends, but we also have to do our part as well, and just to be careful and to be ever mindful. We have the support from the White House on down. As I referenced earlier, the White House, the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism is the official name. This is a 60-page document with more than 200 recommendations, very concrete, tactical strategies, whole of government response to dealing with the oldest hatred known to humankind. The fact that this was announced in May from the highest pulpit in the land, from the White House, across the board, gives it tremendous power and currency. But it's a blueprint that requires follow-up. And we're doing a lot, as much as we can at AJC to advance it, as our partner organizations. But it does ultimately require each of our being vigilant and mindful as we go forward. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the highlighting information. And talking about what happened now is Sebastopol. So we had really very good media. The whole world is for us. But the minute the situation in the hospital happened, of course, there was like, everybody believed in us, there was a lot of division. Everybody turned against us. And my question is, how can we, through social media, PR, to undo the damage to the people that believed in us and now are against us?
So just to be clear, the question is, especially in the aftermath of the rocket hitting the hospital in Gaza, and the sense that the tide of support, media-wise and social media-wise, has now turned against Israel. How do we get that back? It is a daily struggle. I will say that the spokespeople for the Israel Defense Forces, who have been just on shifts, 24/7 since October 7th, have done, in my view, a remarkable job. They are, their English is impeccable. Sometimes it's the King's English even. They explain the situation in ways that are understandable to people who may be even new to the region or new to paying attention to the issues there. So I think the IDF has done a remarkable job, and all of that radiates on social media. I mentioned CNN earlier. CNN, to a person, has been outstanding, I believe, in the coverage thus far. It starts to get a little more, a little squishier when you start talking about some other networks here and there. And I won't name the ones that I think have been problematic, but I'll stay positive. Social media is the great unknown, and there will be those who hated Israel before and don't want to be confused with the facts. I'll share with you, earlier this week, I went before the Board of Supervisors, LA County Board of Supervisors. This is a 5-person, all women, fantastic public servants who represent the largest county in America, 10 million people. So each member of the Board of Supervisors is the equivalent of 2.5 members of Congress, if you think about the areas that they cover. And within days of the attack, one of the supervisors, Lindsay Horvath, who previously was the mayor of West Hollywood, put forward a resolution for all of the supervisors. Pretty simple: apple pie. condemning Hamas, supporting Israel's right to exist and defend itself. Even not forget the defending part, just right to exist, because obviously that's contrary to Hamas's charter. And I went down to the Board of Supervisors to offer testimony in support of the measure. And there was probably a week between that measure first being introduced and it finally coming before the board at the regularly scheduled meeting. Well, that was more than enough time for the haters of Israel to mobilize. Everybody gets a minute of public comment. Some people showed up in person, others were calling in, and the basic narrative that was being put forward, you could tell they were, and we can learn from this in our own community in terms of having, talking points ready to go and people ready to get on the phone and express. There was a common theme that was heard again and again and again, sitting through this for about an hour and a half, because you pretty much have to listen to everybody who is queued up for public comment. And it goes something like this. Many of the callers were from an organization called Jewish Voice for Peace. Sounds very benign. These are some of the people who were protesting in front of Vice President Harris and Second Gentleman Emhoff's home in Brentwood just on Friday. And you think when you first hear the call, you think, okay, somebody on our side. And it starts something like, I'm either the child or I'm the grandchild of Holocaust survivors. I'm proud of my Jewish heritage and faith. I'm saddened by what has taken place, by the suffering. They don't talk about, they're not condemning the Hamas attack, but I'm saddened for the suffering. Don't weaponize my grief to support a genocide against the Palestinians. That's the line. That's the twist in the formulation in all of this. And again and again and again. And it's a unique kind of torture when you're sitting in an assembly hall and you just are listening to this for an hour and a half, different voices, pretty much with the same message. And then, as if that wasn't enough, those who did show up in person, and each had their minute, nobody was denied the podium or the microphone, all of a sudden stood up, unfurled their signs, and started sloganing and screaming, from the river to the sea. And that's code, free, free Palestine, and from the river to the sea, that's code for the elimination of Israel. It's not even code, it's a brazen declaration for the elimination of the state of Israel. They were ultimately escorted out of the hall. The meeting was interrupted. The meeting was reconvened. The meeting was interrupted again. By the end of the day, thankfully, the survivors voted 5-0 to support the resolution, as it should be. So, your question was about social media. It's important to pay attention, and there are some outstanding resources. And part of the beauty or the magic of social media is that it gives us all a voice. And you don't have to be poetic or be writing original prose. You see something you like, you can share it. And when you share it, others will share it. And hopefully that's how the better message gets out there. But there's a lot of hate. There's a lot of hate out there, and there's a lot of incitement out there. I'll go a little deeper. Didn't share this with my wife yet, and who's my counselor in every way. But I was looking at Rashida Tlaib's social media account today, because Sammy Woll, who was Samantha, who was murdered yesterday, kind of lives either right in her district or just sort of adjacent, and apparently even did some work for Tlaib when she first helped she did some organizing. And so Tlaib posted, she's heartbroken, sympathy. This is the same Rashida Tlaib who has been posting and sharing some very ugly stuff over the last 10 days. But she talked about it's not for me to question her authenticity and her sadness over this horrific murder. And there were all sorts of comments. So sorry for you, our sympathies, all the appropriate comments from people who mean well. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting, and I kept scrolling down. Finally, there was one comment that said, "Your words have constituted incitement." And it wasn't effectively saying this is on you, but it was saying words matter, and your words have not helped in terms of the climate that's out there. And I was like, thank God somebody said that. And that's what we're dealing with. So, social media it's an open marketplace, and it's tantamount to people screaming at each other at the top of their lungs all at the same time. So that's the arena. But we can't be absent from that arena. And so I think it means you just have to sort of pick and choose your spots and be careful. But it's important that we be there. There was another hand. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, this is a change in terms of philanthropy for Israel. So my thought is you give to known entities like AJC Federation. But I've been getting emails from Israel saying, can you put money into this account? My child is in the IDF, they need boots, they need jackets, they need vests, they need all these things that they don't have. And then I have a friend that does fundraising for Federation in Westchester, New York, and she sent me something from the IDF saying, they have plenty of materials. So what's your thought? I mean, do we send to individuals?
It's a great question, because there have been anecdotal reports. I'm glad your friend with the Westchester office of UJA Federation of New York clarified that for you. One way to be absolutely sure and to sort of bridge that uncertainty is to donate to Friends of the IDF. They're a remarkable organization. That's one. Federation has its emergency fund. AJC has an emergency fund. Every penny goes directly to a number of organizations, including IsraAid, which is a great organization. IsraAid has been around, maybe 20 years, and has really been the best face of Israel when other countries suffer natural disasters. IsraAid teams, they show up, they parachute in, they figure out what they need to do, they set up logistics, and they start helping. And they usually stay for years while a country comes back. For the very, very first time, IsraAid is setting up shop in Israel, mostly for trauma relief and support, but they are an amazing organization. If you give to the AJC fund, it will go to IsraAid, among others. I think the more general funds are probably the better way to go, but you can give directly to IsraAid, you can give directly to Friends of the IDF, you can give directly to Magen David Adom, all good. It maybe gets there a little faster. There's no overhead that with the pass through with AJC or with Federation or with UJA in New York, but it just maybe gets there faster. And most importantly, it's just give where your heart takes you. Absolutely. Yes.
And earlier in your conversation, you used the term militant from us. I've always wondered, militant, it seems to me that's a softer description of what they are. So explain to me from your perspective the difference of using the word term militants versus terrorists, which again seems to be more accurate representation. Because the media uses both.
Thank you for the question. The difference because language does matter between using the term terrorists versus militants. I generally don't use the term militants, and if I did this morning, I would withdraw the term. Honestly, I say terrorists, and when I think terrorists, I think of those actively engaged in that act on October 7th, and if I slipped into the other term, it was those, kind of lying in wait, who are, readying or holding hostages, all of that. But it is a terrorist organization. There's no question about that, and it's important that we, be as clear as possible on language. So thank you for that. Yes, way in the back. Thank you.
My question regards the demonstrations that we have. And in my view, I think freedom to protest is fundamentally protected by law. Even if the 31 organizations in Harvard all over that are demonstrating against Israel are odious to me. I am very concerned about the lawyers and who are asking for the identification of those protesters. In my view, this snaps right out of Joseph McCarthy's House of Un-American Activities, where you identify all communists. So I wonder if AJC has contemplated enunciating a policy that they should have the right to protest and not fear for identification if we show reprisals by respective employers. Because all they're doing is what that does is just silencing the expression of different views, which I think we need to encourage, even if we hate some of those.
So let me try to capture the question, the right of free speech and public expression, both on, I want to separate out because I think I heard a little different angle, both on the college campus or just potentially in the workplace or anywhere. So let me start with the college campuses. This is a time in which Jewish students, I'm generalizing, but sometimes generalizations are accurate. Jewish students are, for the most part, not feeling safe or supported on their college campuses these days. They are feeling a sense of intimidation. Even before October 7th, if you were a proud Zionist, what does it mean to be a Zionist? It means to agree with and support the idea of Jews establishing a national homeland in our ancestral homeland. And Zionism is a 100+ year movement that ultimately led to the fulfillment of that aspiration. So to be a Zionist is to support the idea of a modern state of Israel. So for the crime of being a Zionist on a college campus, many young Jewish students who want to sign up, maybe go to Hillel or go to Chabad, but also they care about the environment, they care about other social justice issues, they get canceled, they get eliminated, they get excluded by virtue of this label of being Zionists. So this is the climate before October 7th. Subsequent to October 7th, there are many organizations. It's the most prominent organization on many campuses. It's called SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. They have every right to demonstrate and to protest on college campuses. Where it becomes incendiary or ugly or hateful is the expression, are the calls for, again, from the river to the sea. And the failure of these organizations to condemn, even acknowledge the brutality and the evil of the Hamas terrorists on October 7th is appalling and is simply beyond comprehension. And those groups need to be called out. They can say whatever they want to say, but we have an obligation, the Jewish community, college administrators, faculty, college presidents, to call it out as they see it and to condemn. And I'll say that the overall kind of track record in the last 2 weeks on college campuses has sort of run the gamut. There have been some campuses that have been emphatic and unequivocal in their condemnation of Hamas. There are other administrators who have been a little mealy-mouthed, and there have been others who have looked the other way. And that's a problem. That is a problem. There was a lecturer at Stanford you may have heard about, not a tenured academic, but a lecturer who asked who the Jewish students were. When they raised their hands, he made them go stand in the corner, and he says, that's what Israel does to the Palestinians. At Stanford. This isn't some, podunk, whatever, junior college, not to cast aspersions on junior colleges. But this is what we are dealing with. At Penn, before October 7th, Penn had a problem where the administration was very slow to respond to a festival that was being organized called Palestinian Rights, WRITES. Writers, poets, activists. I looked at the lineup. It was shared with me of those who were invited. I didn't immediately recognize the history of some of these people, but one of them stood out loud and clear. Roger Waters of Pink Floyd. You know, every time a Pink Floyd song comes on the radio in the car, as much as I might like the song, I almost run off the road trying to change the channel. This is somebody who is an anti-Semite, not just anti-Israel, but purely an anti-Semite. And he was invited to speak. Ultimately, he didn't show. But Penn was very slow to respond. And so the point here, to your point about taking names, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. However, I believe there are certain consequences to behavior. And this is where it comes back to social media. And sort of the advice to many young job seekers today is when you're interviewing for a position, understand that social media is basically, when you post something on social media, you are basically saying to the world, this is what I think, this is what I support, this is what I believe. And you better, make sure it's pretty tight, or you've brushed it up and cleaned it up before you apply for a job. So the president of the student, forgive me, the not law review, but it was like the student law student association at NYU, who already had a job lined up at a white shoe firm, was glorifying the Hamas attack. Guess what? That job offer was rescinded, and it served her right that happened. And so that's where, so there's a fine line. Should students, SJP wants to demonstrate at UCLA as they did a week ago, should their names and photos and all that be turned over to law enforcement? Absolutely not. But social media profiles, you're saying to the world, this is who I am, this is what I stand for. And that law firm, to their credit, took a look and said, doesn't really align with our values or who we are. And I think there have to be consequences. Yes.
So you've modulated a little bit in what you're saying, that there's a time for that later, a time for some discussions about coming together, about solutions. And I'm interested in, some of the questions that I've had are, what should we be doing with interfaith relations? What should we be doing here in community? Is that a later kind of activity, or is it things that we can start doing now?
It's a both. It's really a both. I sound like a politician. The right now is to make sure that those with whom we've engaged in dialogue, those who we view as our friends, our partners, that they understand first and foremost the pain and anguish we are feeling. That how we are connected, that not only in Israel, there's no one in Israel who isn't in some way connected to someone who was either lost, murdered, missing, or being held hostage. That's we're one big family there and here. And I think part of it is to make sure our friends understand what we're feeling and to have those conversations. I think it's very, very important. I have a dear friend, and he's a new friend from earlier this year, the work that AJC has done. Russell was with us. We took a pilgrimage with our Japanese American friends, fellow organizations and leaders, up to the Manzanar incarceration camp, 4 hours north of LA, where 10,000 Japanese Americans, or Americans of Japanese ancestry, were incarcerated in a real open air prison, which you sometimes hear Gaza referred to. This was a real open air prison for some 3 years during the war, and have that experience with them. So on Friday morning, Susan and I were thinking about what will we do for Shabbat this evening. My dear friend Mitch Mackey, who runs a wonderful organization called Go for Broke. It's all about the the Japanese American soldiers who enlisted, some of them who raised their hand while they were in camp to fight for the US overseas. Some of them were the first to arrive at Dachau and help to liberate Dachau, a story that our government didn't really want to tell at that time because of its horrible, horrible ironies. But those stories are being told now. I get a text from Mitch, Rick, I don't know if you're going to synagogue tonight, but if you are, I'd like to come with you. And we ended up, we've got a wonderful Chabad rabbi, they're all wonderful, but we have a wonderful Chabad rabbi living across the street from us who always invites us, and he said, tonight we're doing a Unity Shabbat, and we'd love for you to come. And we did, and Mitch came as well. And it was the mix, it's what you expect from Chabad. This isn't a commercial for Chabad, but it was, the sadness was dealt with, but there was also dancing. And it was a little bit of everything. And it was just a beautiful gathering, but that's the kind of allyship we need now. And so I would just come together, have those safe space conversations, help our friends and allies understand what's going on. Let's try to process it. The Jewish community feels tremendous anguish at the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza. They've been victimized and subjugated for almost 20 years by Hamas. And now the world sees it. When Israel pulled out, these are the things we need to share and say. When Ariel Sharon of blessed memory, and of all people, voluntarily, unilaterally disengaged from Gaza in 2005, the idea was, Gesundheit, go build a beautiful society, thriving, right along the seaside, right along the sea. It's the same sea that Tel Aviv is on, and just a few miles down the road, and turned it into this beautiful oasis where there's opportunity, where there's growth, where there's a future. Frankly, it should have far eclipsed the quality of life on the West Bank, which isn't that bad, but I know that's not the answer, ultimately. And this is what we got, and this is what the world is seeing. And so I think part of it is just to have those conversations and to stay together and try to shed some light in all of this. Rabbi.
Do you have any insight into the politics and realities around the Rafah border with Egypt, with Sinai, and aid that is meant to come in to Gaza and all of that? Because I'm seeing more reports about it, and it's increasingly the tenor is somehow Israel is preventing it, Israel doesn't want it, or there's so little aid, and what's going on?
I think what we're seeing, and there are a lot of conflicting reports, even this morning, I think the trucks are beginning to accelerate, trucks providing relief and supplies accelerate, more and more need to come in. I think the Egyptians were a little slow to get on board. They don't want the Palestinians flooding in. They certainly don't want Hamas coming in. They've had their own issues with Muslim Brotherhood through the years, but I'm not sure they have any other choice at this point. And this is not an AJC perspective. It's just my sort of thinking here. We lived in New Jersey for about 4 years, and everything always comes back to New Jersey. And I see a little bit of, Menendez Gate here. 3 weeks ago, what was he thinking? Again, when Senator Menendez, everybody's innocent, presumption of innocence until proven guilty, but gold bars and all else, appears to have been doing some side foreign policy with Egypt and helping achieve for Egypt what they could not achieve through regular diplomatic channels. And my gut just tells me that when Secretary of State Blinken was in Egypt, he delivered a certain message, especially in light of this, that they need to get on board and need to do more. And whether it's setting up, a certain buffer so that they're at least out of Gaza, but not any further penetrating into Egypt. I think we'll see more there. I also think we'll see from it's Qatar, you say Qatar, I say Qatar, but that's the direct pipeline to Hamas. And And the Qataris, they hosted the World Cup, put on a nice face for the world. There was a lot behind the scenes that wasn't so pretty in terms of what it took to get there. But I think you're going to see certain countries wanting to curry favor with the US, which will help, because the immediate priority, the absolute immediate priority, and perhaps this is why Israel is poised but waiting and will continue to wait, is to get the hostages out of there alive as much as possible. So stay tuned a little bit with that. Yes.
So I'm wondering what you might think about our own institutions, synagogues, etc., bearing some responsibility for what happened. And I just want to, there's a temple down the street from here. 2 years ago put on there's a collective that does puppet shows, and not just little puppets, but they dress up as puppets. And and this was on a Shabbat, and it was advertised. There was a lot of kids. There was a lot of people. The rabbi there, whatever her affiliation is, brought these people in. And one of the vignettes, or one of the puppet shows, was of a Palestinian woman covered in sackcloth and ashes, bemoaning Palestine and advocating for a Palestinian state from I think her word was from the mountains to the sea, but we know what that's all about. And I put up a stink. There was never a response. The Jewish Journal was told about it. There was never a response. In fact, they bring her on very often as one of the voices in their newspaper. But I'm sure that that's not just the only place that happens. And I'm wondering how much our own organizations may have some responsibility for spreading this hate and spreading what's going on in the college campuses and elsewhere. And we have to look at ourselves, perhaps, as bearing some responsibility for what we've been talking about. If you have any comments.
Sure. So again, the question is about to what extent there may be some Jewish voices and organizations and institutions that have helped to create a certain climate of anti-Israel sentiment. And we have it in our community. Our Jewish community is not a monolith. When I mentioned the Board of Supervisors hearing so many of these calls came from this organization, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, because as if there's somehow this particular credibility, that is the intention, to start, to begin every conversation with, as a child of or as a grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, as someone who believes in Tikkun Olam, blah, 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 down the line, I cannot countenance Israel's abhorrent treatment, blah, blah, blah. And I think there is a challenge there. We have to have room for those voices in our community, but I think we all need to be mindful of the consequences of our speech and the need to be responsible in the things that we say. It's very easy to be in a bit of an ivory tower here in the US when we're not on the front lines, when we haven't sent our kids into battle. Israel has called up, it's an unprecedented call up of reserves, some 400,000, which speaks to the earlier question about, just basic, equipment and all of that. I think we have to be, what you described with the puppet show is just, in my view, it's abhorrent, but not to everybody, unfortunately. And I think that's where, we have, this is serious. There are lives that hang in the balance here. And again, I come back to the fundamental truth from which everything, and really lens through which everything should be viewed, especially going forward with these difficult days that await us. Hamas brutally attacked and murdered murdered more than 1,400, maimed and injured a couple thousand. And when you see the images of, an 80-something-year-old Holocaust survivor, being kidnapped and taken into Gaza, and just some of the images of those, only now in the last couple of days have the media been allowed into a couple of the kibbutzim and to see and understand what really took place, just the level of sheer barbarity on the part of Hamas. And that's what it all begins there. And I would hope, honestly, the place down the street, thinks about that and understands that when they go forward. But again, our community is not a monolith, but I think we all have to be responsible in our speech, because words do matter and words do have consequences.
How about if we take a final 2 questions?
Sure, so maybe we'll do gentleman in the green shirt and then right here.
I know that the AJC was involved with the Abraham Court, and you mentioned there's 100 missions here, 25 showed up in the event. What are you hearing from the other 75 missions?
So the question is about the consular and diplomatic response to events. Everything's been so fast moving and fast evolving. Not every consulate in Los Angeles is a friend of Israel. And so we had to be a little bit careful and selective, and I worked closely with the Consul General of Romania, Cosmin Dumitrescu, who is they have their own sort of governance structure, so he's the Dean of the Consular Corps here in LA. And the word went out in 2 days' time, and the response, I believe, was overwhelmingly positive. And among those who took to the podium that day, France and Italy, Panama, who else? There were Greece, Czechia. We were moving so fast, I made the mistake. I thought it was Czechoslovakia. It was Czechia, real country. And actually, it was that consul general who even just was literally shaking as he spoke. We brought out pictures of people being his fellow countrymen who were being held in Gaza, and Japan spoke. It was a remarkable gathering. I think we have to ask the others. It's unclear. It's unclear here in LA. It's probably a little clearer. It all starts with Washington. It all starts with their home offices, their foreign ministries, and you can pretty much tell. But while there are that many consulates in Los Angeles, we don't necessarily interact with all of them for obvious reasons. They're not all friends, but fortunately, many of them are. And I think it's the right question to ask in all of this. And then I think, right here, please.
Several things. One is, please make sure, if they don't already know, your Japanese American friend knows that at the intersection of Lincoln Boulevard and Venice, on the northwest corner is a black marble obelisk in memory of Manson Mark. It's really good, because that intersection was where local Japanese American citizens were required to gather to put on buses.
Thank you for that.
And definitely check that out.
What is the intersection exactly?
Venice and Lincoln Boulevard, northwest corner.
Venice and Lincoln Boulevard, a memorial to Manzanar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Secondly, the AP published an article where they did an analysis of videos and satellite images and radar about the rocket falling on the hospital. And I like it that it's an independent organization, Associated Press. It's not U.S. government, it's rated for any government. They said it's probably a homemade rocket from one of the radical groups in Gaza that sent it off. And the reason that Israel picked it off Islamic Jihad is because right after it was sent off, Islamic Jihad sent out a message on WhatsApp or whatever. We just fired a bunch of missiles at Tel Aviv. Like 17 missiles, one of which fell apart, because they're all named missiles. Lastly, I'm concerned about Israel losing its moral high ground, in particular cutting off the water to Gaza. Humans can live without electricity, but they cannot live without water. And I'm concerned about that hurting Israel's high ground. I'm concerned that really was not
So thank you for the other points of information, very, very helpful. And the question in terms of the the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, because it is real, it is legitimate, and specifically the question of the restoration of water. I heard Secretary of State Blinken on one of the news programs this morning asked point blank whether or not water was being restored, and he answered yes. It's something that is happening. But make no mistake, the Palestinian people, particularly as the war continues, will suffer. Children will suffer. This is a very, very difficult situation that has been inflicted upon them by Hamas. And it's hopefully aid and support and relief will come. Hopefully Israel will certainly go to great lengths to limit civilian casualties. Even over these last several days, the directive for people to move from the northern part of Gaza, which is really where so much of Hamas is based because it's closest to Israel's cities, down to the south, to the Rafah and Khan Yunis area of Gaza. Does it create enormous hardship? Does it create even more density in these urban centers? Of course it does. And the suffering is will be very difficult and will get worse. And the hope is that Israel will do whatever it can to enable aid. I think Israel has every intention of doing that. But fundamentally, the Hamas threat must be eliminated once and for all. It just can't continue. It's untenable. No country would tolerate it, and Israel shouldn't have to either. And we have to hope for a better day, but there will be pain before. Maybe one last question.
It's not a question, it's a comment I got right now on social media. Jews in Paris have reportedly begun removing mezuzah and other Jewish symbols to avoid being targeted.
So the comment that mezuzahs and sort of the public indicia of being Jewish. Paris is difficult. Some of the protests in Paris were horrific. I don't know if you follow. Susan introduced me to this remarkable comedian, Modi Rosenfeld. Modi is actually a trained cantor, beautiful voice, Orthodox, gay, and he's doing a lot of work changing attitudes in that community. But he's a fantastic comedian, and he was going forward doing some of his shows, and he was scheduled to do a show in Paris, and he was going forward with that, all of this to support relief for Israel, and he ultimately canceled the show in Paris a few days ago because the situation is just ugly on the street there. And it's a very sad commentary. God forbid we ever get to that point in America, but it is not easy to be a Jew in the world today. I think with that, I'll say thank you very, very much. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, is it off now? Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Please take a final nosh. We thank you so much, Richard and Susan, for joining us and teaching us so much today. Have a very good afternoon, and we will keep Israel in our hearts. Am Yisrael Chai.